So, are you that person? The one who's always chronically late. You look at the clock, you swear you have plenty of time, and then bam! Somehow you're running 20 minutes behind schedule again. Well, today we're going to dive into why that happens, and trust me, it is absolutely not what you think.
Ah, yes. We've all sent that text, haven't we? It's the universal code for I am in a full-blown state of panic and time has officially lost all meaning. If you're sitting there nodding your head, maybe with a little bit of a guilty smile, then you are in exactly the right place. So let's start by tearing down the biggest myth about being late.
Okay, first things first, we have got to talk about the story that society tells us about being late. Those labels really sting, don't they? The common idea is that if you're late, you must be lazy or disorganized, or you just flat out don't care about other people's time. And it creates this constant feeling of guilt and panic. But what if that entire story is just wrong? Because this is where things get interesting. See, psychology offers a completely different and, frankly, a much more compassionate explanation. The truth isn't about your character. It's all about your cognition. And here it is, the core difference. Society slaps on these heavy labels like laziness and disrespect, but psychology, it points to actual cognitive traits, things like time blindness and optimism bias. It suggests your brain just perceives the passage of time in a fundamentally different way. You're not rude, you're just wired differently. So let's get into the nitty-gritty. There are 4 key psychological reasons that can explain why you always seem to be racing against that clock. First up, you are an idealist. It's true. People who are always on time, they tend to be realists. They budget time for traffic, for finding their keys. But you see the world as it should be, not always as it actually is. This is a real cognitive thing. It's called the planning fallacy. Your brain automatically, without you even realizing it, defaults to the absolute best case scenario. You think, oh, the drive only takes 15 minutes because it did one time at 3 in the morning when every single light was green. You don't naturally account for the messy bits of reality. Okay, so optimism explains why your plans might be a little, shall we say, ambitious. But that doesn't explain why it's so incredibly hard to physically walk out the door. Well, the second reason is you might just be what we can call a transition perfectionist. Does this little loop look familiar? It's the perfectionist trap in action. Your brain just hates leaving a task unfinished. While other people can just drop what they're doing and head out, you feel this deep compulsion to get everything just right before you can switch gears. See, it's not about being sloppy. It's about a brain that craves closure. Now, this next one is a really big one. For so many people who are chronically late, it all comes down to something called time blindness. It means you just don't feel time passing in that normal, linear, tick-tock kind of way. So you sit down to maybe scroll on your phone or you get really focused on a project and you just get completely lost in it. You're in a total flow state. And in your mind, almost no time has gone by at all. You glance up thinking, okay, it's been like 5 minutes. And boom, 40 minutes have completely vanished into thin air. That sudden jolt of panic is the only thing that breaks the spell. Now, this ability to get lost in the moment is an absolute superpower for creativity. But yeah, it's a real curse for trying to catch a train. And finally, number 4. Let's just be honest with ourselves for a second. For some of us, there's a part of our brain that secretly kind of thrives on the chaos. You need that last-minute pressure to actually get moving. There's a name for this, It's called being an urgency responder. When you have hours and hours to spare, your brain is just understimulated. It's bored. But the second that adrenaline spike of, oh my gosh, I'm going to be late hits, your focus becomes laser sharp. You might even subconsciously create these little crises because that anxiety is the fuel your brain needs to get going. Okay, so we've broken down the why, but here's where it gets really powerful. Because all of these so-called flaws, they are actually the flip side of some pretty incredible strengths. Seriously, just take a moment and look at this. That unrealistic planning, that comes from being a hopeful and resilient person. That inability to just get up and leave on time, it's a demand for closure, for being thorough. Losing track of time is actually a capacity for deep, immersive focus. And needing that pressure, it just means you thrive when the stakes are high. These aren't weaknesses, they're your superpowers in a different context. So what do you do with all this information? You stop fighting your brain and you start working with it. And it can all start with one really simple practical change. Look, the goal here isn't to change who you are, it's to build a buffer for your brain's natural tendencies.
The simplest way to do that is to just build in more time than you think you need. Aim to be 20 minutes early for everything. This little 20-minute cushion gives your inner optimist room for that unexpected traffic. It lets your transition perfectionist send out one last email, and it stops your urgency responder from needing to create a crisis just to get out the door.
I really want you to let this one sink in. You are not a bad person. You're not disrespectful. You aren't broken. You just have a brain that is wired to get totally lost in the present moment. A brain that is deeply, deeply engaged with whatever is right in front of it. And you know what? The world really needs that.
So the next time you find yourself rushing and you start to feel that guilt creeping in, instead of beating yourself up, maybe ask yourself this question. Once you stop seeing your lateness as some kind of moral failing and start seeing it as a cognitive quirk with its own hidden strengths, a whole new world of possibilities just might open up.